An Orthodox colleague of mine from Long Island told me a story recently about a family from his congregation who he called High Holy Day Jews. He said they came Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, and he never judged them. He liked them, didn't see them often. But he said that their son, who was a proud cadet at West Point, suddenly after a semester at West Point started to show up at Sabbath services. Was coming every single week he was home. So the curious rabbi went up and said, "Son, I don't mind at all. I'm really happy to see you, but I've never really seen you more than just Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. Why are you here every Shabbat?" He said, "Rabbi, it's interesting. Last semester I took a course called The History of All Wars. And in that course, we were supposed to study every major war that had occurred in history and to learn from them. Well, it was the last couple of days of the semester. The professor was wrapping things up, and he raised his hand and he said, "Colonel, sir, I just have to ask you a question. It seems like we're wrapping up the course and we've studied every war in history, but we haven't studied at all any of the Israel wars, any of the wars between Israel and their Arab neighbors." He said, "Son, stop talking and see me after class." So he goes to his office. The young cadet is trembling. He doesn't want to offend his professor, the colonel. And he says, "Son, what were you trying to get at?" And he said, "I was just asking the question. We studied all of these wars and never once was mentioned any of the Arab-Israeli wars." And he said, "Son, let me tell you something. All of myself and my colleagues, we've studied every single one of those wars. We've studied military strategy. We've studied military technology. We've taken all the wherewithal we have at West Point. And the truth is we keep on coming up with the same conclusion that from everything we know, Israel should not have won any of those wars." He said, "Son, I'm sorry to tell you, at West Point, we just don't study miracles." Maybe you want to think about going to your local parish and speaking to your priest or to your rabbi. And so the young man says to his rabbi, "I figured I'd come here and see if I could figure out how it is that miracles work, because they don't teach us that at West Point." My good people, we gather on this new year looking for miracles. Our world obviously feels frightening. An outbreak of deadly disease. Please take a moment with me and pray for those suffering from Ebola. The suicide of a comedic hero this summer. How did Robin Williams become so depressed that he convinced himself that his family and his fans in the world no longer needed him? Pray with me, my dear friends. Pray with me that we destigmatize depression in this country. Superstar athletes beating their spouses and children with twitches. Pray with me. Pray with me for the plethora of victims of domestic violence. And we come here on the dawn of this new year, such a war-wearied nation, at war once again. We have lost so many brave men and women over the past decade or so, so pray with me. Pray with me for their families. Pray with me for those who are going to fight again to defend our freedom and our right to exist here in our homeland. I feel, and you've told me you feel, that a world has just gone medieval on us. It's gone medieval on us. But perhaps what I've realized lately is that maybe in our isolation geographically, that the rest of the world is living a world that we just don't understand. This is a world currently that is one of land grabs. It's one of beheadings. It's one where people utilize civilians as human shields. And then there is what has dug at our spirits most this summer. The thing you keep on saying, what are you going to say about it? What are you going to tell us about it? The next existential round in Israel, and perhaps the next existential round for we Jews as well. Folks, I don't use the word existential for melodrama. I have not experienced this much fear in the hearts of Jews in the 17 plus years that I've served as a rabbi. We fret, and we fret for good reason. Israel is fighting for her life. We woke up this summer to a nightmarish reality. We were shocked into dismay at things like terror tunnels and human shields. Our breath was taken away at Hamas pathology and hypocrisy. So I come right out without hiding it all and tell you that I'm here to tell you on this first day of the new year with all due urgency that it is our absolute obligation to stand foursquare with Israel. Some of you have said to me, you keep on calling Israel our homeland. I know. America is my home. I'm such a proud American. America is your home. You're proud Americans. We live in the greatest country in the world with so many rights and liberties. But folks, Israel is also our home. And if you have to know why Israel is our home, then you have to remember, and only some people in this room do remember, that Israel allows us to live in a secure and safe ways, in ways that we absolutely couldn't before 1948. Ask people who were here then. They'll tell you clearly what it was like to live as a Jew in America without Israel. Israel has become the embodiment, and we're used to this already, that Jews are not powerless because Israel exists. Israel, as those who love democracy, should understand clearly that Israel is the only hint of democracy in a neighborhood of heartless and bitter dictatorships. I'm not blind. Israel has complicated and sobering problems. But I'm telling you right now, without a thriving Israel, our very survival will absolutely be at stake. We cannot stand complacent, and we cannot stand indifferent. We can't, especially because we have lots of detractors out there. We have repeatedly heard, you watch the news like I did, that the war this summer was asymmetrical. And it's true. Any of us who have human hearts were overwhelmed by the devastating loss of innocent Palestinians. Many kept on asking why Israel couldn't show more restraint. But here's the thing, is that critique in itself shows how deeply our world absolutely misunderstands Israel's predicament. You see, for Israelis, the Gaza conflict was just the latest round in an exceedingly effective war on civilian Israel. If you go back in history, conventional Arab aggression has lasted, we cannot all agree, 1948, but probably before. Something happened with the Yom Kippur War that changed the whole game. Arabs suddenly realized that they were never going to beat Israel in the conventional ways, in the old-fashioned way. So the enemy realized that the only way to break Israel was to attack her heart. And what do you do when you attack Israel's heart? You attack her innocent civilians. I don't have to go through one by one, but it wasn't that long ago. We shouldn't forget. Do you remember what it was like in the 90s and the early 2000s? Do you remember day after day, suicide bombing after suicide bombing? Buses and pizza shops, discos and cafes blew up daily. My dad and I went for a summer solidarity trip, the two of us. We went into a restaurant. I remember a pan fell and all of us jumped. Like this was it, we were about to die. The generally hardened Israeli, you know the Saba, right? Really tough on the outside. Suddenly they became numbed and shaken. They wondered how they could ever defeat an enemy not like Sadat who wanted to make a trade for land. The enemy changed. It was an enemy now who totally embraced death, when the problem with us, with Israelis, is that we're l'chaim. We totally embrace life. So yes, the war was asymmetrical, but somehow the world keeps on forgetting. They keep on forgetting that Israel unilaterally withdrew from Gaza in 2006, And ever since then, there's been a barrage of rockets almost every single day, so much so that they're not even reported anymore because they're not interesting to the world. An army commander, a very dear friend of mine who has a dear friend who's an army commander, said, "You know what's wild? Is they never ever aim rockets at my soldiers at the military bases. They only instead aim them at civilians. See, their goal is terrorism. Their goal is to incite Israeli despair. Life, especially in the South, has been absolutely and totally organized. You think your schedules at home are hard? You think running your kids to different places are hard? Imagine if you had to organize your whole schedule around that and also figuring out how to get to a shelter within 20 seconds. Tell me how you would deal with that." Another very good friend of mine tells me about her dear friend living down south. Her kids, I'm sure you've had kids who do this. I used to be like this as a kid. Kept on waking up her parents and saying, "Mommy, I can't sleep, I'm hearing voices." She said, "Honey, there are no voices. Mommy and Daddy are here, Ima and Abba are here, we'll take care of you." This went on for 3 or 4 or 5 weeks, and guess what? They were building tunnels right underneath their house. Tunnels underneath their house, they were hearing voices. Their boogeymen and their demons were right under there, ready to kidnap and kill these kids. This wasn't a nightmare, this was reality. The tunnels. Folks, the tunnels changed the whole game in ways we didn't know before. The tunnels, with concrete that we gave to Hamas, with concrete that Israel gave to Hamas, concrete that was supposed to build schools, concrete that was supposed to build highways, concrete that was supposed to build hospitals, concrete that even could have served as shelters for those people who were dying this summer. Let's be clear, very clear. Those tunnels were built with one intention only, and that was to kill and to kidnap innocent Israeli civilians. You know what we learned from documents just uncovered 10, 15 days ago? All the intelligence is being processed now. That today, 5775, first day of Rosh Hashanah, there was supposed to be a coordinated attack from all of those 30-plus tunnels coming up all at once on Rosh Hashanah when our defenses would be down. We went through this once before, remember? They were going to come up and they were going to try to grab hundreds of innocent Israelis and either kill them on the spot, put bracelets on them, and take them back down into Gaza and hold them as kidnapping chips, or kill them and torture their families. Shana Tova, everyone. Happy and healthy New Year. Imagine if that was I was announcing to you today. I remember what it was like being in my synagogue in 1973 and the rabbi coming to us and announcing that war had broken out. Shana Tova. What a sweet way to start the new year. There is something so perverse about the implicit critique from the press. I don't get up here and complain about the press a lot. That's not me. But they kept on saying that this wasn't a fair fight. The press set up some kind of farcical moral equivalency between a nation state on one side and a terrorist organization on the other. No matter what you think about Palestinian statehood, no matter what you think about Palestinians themselves, and I've been on the record with you before, some of you like it, some of you don't. I believe in a Palestinian state. I don't believe innocent Palestinians should die. But that's besides the point. We have to ask ourselves why so many otherwise smart people are so incapable of calling Hamas what it really is. And so since they don't, I'm going to. I'm going to say clearly that they are a diabolical, evil, fundamentalist band of thugs who do nothing in their lives but want to terrorize, of all things, in the name of God. And by the way, they want to push Israel into the ocean. They may want a state, but not with us. They want to eradicate the state of Israel. It's in their charter. Look it up on their website and you could read it. There's no moral equivalency here. There's no moral equivalency here. Hamas is Israel's Al-Qaeda. Hamas is Israel's ISIS. It was asymmetrical. But like any sovereign nation has the rights to do, it defended herself, just like any of us would. Amos Oz, who is left, and gave an interview this summer, and before he started, he said, "I want to ask you, reporter, If I was sitting in a nursery with my grandchild on my knee, and across the way a Palestinian was sitting with a grandchild on his knee, and he started to shoot at me, and I know that killing is anathema to everything I'm about, it burns up the fiber of my being, what am I going to do? He says, you're darn right I'm going to shoot first, because ultimately I'm going to save my grandchild. That's the left of the left of the left opinion. Our case was strong, and yet it seemed that so few around the world cared to hear our narrative. There was no real debate. We woke up to a kangaroo court disguised in the cloak of anti-Semitism. The prejudice against Jews and Israel across our globe has been chilling. Pro-Gazan German protesters chanting this: Hamas, Hamas, Jews to the gas. Parisian Jews holed up in a synagogue, having to be rescued by the police as there are people banging on the synagogue doors. The shooting of 4 Jews in Brussels. English towns proudly declaring themselves, my town is Israeli free. Reports here at home, especially coming from the college campus, of overt bigotry against Jews, students and teachers alike. What happened in Israel this summer has to remind us that we Jews still evoke dark inclinations, don't we? None of what happened in Israel legitimizes this kind of hatred. The balance is absolutely disproportionate. So we come here like that young cadet searching for answers. And I say to you, my good people, this might sound simple, but boy, is it hard. We need to be the answer. We need to be the answer. We need to stand unabashedly with Israel. We need to stand proud also of our Judaism. I have one of my bar mitzvah boys becoming a bar mitzvah who's walking around wearing his Jewish star, telling everyone how proud he is to be a Jew. Why aren't the rest of us standing up being proud? We can't let the conversation go dangling anymore with that seemingly benign comment of bigotry. This is not the time to cower. This is absolutely not the time to be scared. This is the time to be educated and advocate to the AIPACs and the AJCs of our world, the president proudly of AJC here today. This is the time to travel to Israel. It broke our hearts to cancel our trip this summer with 75% of people who were brand new going on a trip, 50% of those kids having to check into hotels with bombs falling around them. We're planning that same trip immediately after this Holy Day season and also taking a solidarity trip to give back the income that we took away. It's also important to sit down with our 18 to 35-year-olds. Rabbi Stanton spoke brilliantly about that millennial generation. We're fearful because 50% of them don't think it matters. 50% of Jewish 18 to 35-year-olds don't think it matters if Israel exists at all. Remember that stat? The problem is, as he pointed out, as Rabbi Stanton pointed out, is we put the onus on them. But you know what? It's also on us. We must take today, and I really mean today. I mean, you go home over whatever it is you eat, your bagels and lox, your matzo ball soup, your kugel, whatever your family recipe is, you go home today. And I mean today, and sit down at your holiday meals and talk about why it is that your family wouldn't be in absolute support of our Jewish homeland. That's what I'm asking you to do today. Go home. Go home and argue about Israeli policy. Go home and debate the Israeli prime minister. Go home and critique away. Please, go argue. Jews are great at it. We're supposed to be, at least. But there has to be a difference. Folks, there has to be a difference between critique of Israel and not supporting the Jewish state. Do you see that? There has to be a difference between not supporting Israel and critique. How is it that critique means you don't support the willingness for us to survive as a people? So, the alarm clock is ringing. The alarm clock is ringing, and we must hear it sound. So this is what I mean by different format. And Mr. Green, don't charge me for minutes of my sermon. We're mixing up service and sermon here. I don't want to get charged for the time. With love. Close your eyes and listen. You're going to hear our age-old call. and it's asking you to stand up for your people. This call is asking you to stand up and be proud. This call is standing up and saying that we will overcome and we will thrive. Our people here and our people in Israel, come stand with me for a second. Literally, let's stand up for our country. Let us be woken up. Tekiah, Shavarim Teruah, Tekiah, Tekiah. And say with me, Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord is one, and we will be one. Yeah, please be seated. Folks, we're not done. We're not done, please. Folks, the conversation's not over. Conversation's not over. I told you it wasn't. We're mixing sermon and service here. See, we can't leave the sacred space with just that message. We can't. We also have to take out a mirror and ask ourselves how you think we have conducted ourselves through this crisis. I know, and I said before, that we feel existential fear. But I also want to remind you about the danger of fear. The danger of how fear can paralyze us. The danger of how fear can act as a disguise the way we act. Some of our actions, both here in Israel, have made us take pause. In Israel, you should know there is a growing element of what I call, this is going to be painful to hear, but what I call Jewish skinheads. Yes. First, it was death to the Arabs graffiti. That was ignored. Then it was the midnight removal of Palestinian olive trees from their groves, and that was ignored. Then it was the burning of mosques, and that was mostly ignored. And then our people kidnapped and burned a Palestinian child alive. Yes, that was us. Our people did that. Is that how we conduct ourselves? I get it. It's true that we detest the horror and Hamas celebrates the murderers. It's true that we arrest the culprits and they name streets after them. But it was pointed out by a conservative commentator who I adore, Danny Gore is also speaking here. You're getting a lot of AGC props there today. Also speaking here this year, he said all of that is also totally irrelevant. Moral equivalency makes a mockery of truth, but moral superiority makes a mockery of responsibility. Do you hear me? Moral equivalency makes a mockery of truth. Moral superiority makes a mockery of responsibility. Being better than them is not good enough. It's not. That's Israel. And then there's us, this Jewish America. A very dear friend of mine, conservative rabbi, spoke in his capacity as the president of the New York Board of Rabbis at a summer solidarity rally for Israel. He spoke passionately for Israel. 12 minutes he spoke passionately in defense of Israel. For 20 seconds he mentioned that Jewish people should also show compassion for this Palestinian kid who was burned and who was killed. Most of the crowd stayed silent, and some of them booed. But after that, he himself, his family, and his congregation repeatedly for weeks got death threats. Death threats, yes, from some Arabs, but folks, he got more death threats from Jews. He did. I get that these are fringe elements. I know that's not us. But let me ask you a question. Do we speak up against that type of behavior? Do we speak up and say that that too is wrong? Or do we excuse it in our fear? Or do we excuse it because we're so thirsty for revenge? I'm interested in understanding if this is the example we want to set for our children. You see, anti-Semitism creates certain obligations for us. It means that we just don't act like them. It means that we're not here to convince them of anything, but in the end, our character is at stake, folks. This is our character we're talking about. The stereotypes and vitriol I've heard these past months have shaken me. I regularly hear sound bites shared as truth when I know they come from the same propaganda-filled emails that I received that same morning. I'm nervous because I think it's plugging us into a very dangerous and insidious cycle in American society where we can no longer talk about vital issues. I love talking about things that count. I love talking about policy. I love talking about politics. I'm not just talking about Israel. But now when you have these conversations, people act like their lives are at stake over a simple conversation that, yes, plugs into important issues, but their whole life is going to end if they don't win the argument. Name calling. All the time I hear name calling. This secretary of this part of the government doesn't know his rear end from his elbow. This secretary of this other department, I know both of his parents were probably brother and sister. This one, I'm sure, is the son of the devil. Really? What are we, 5-year-olds? That's substantive conversation? That's how adults talk to each other? I had Shabbat dinner at very, very dear friends' home, and I had a wonderful conversation with their grandson, who really wanted to let me know his opinions. And they were definitely very different than mine are. You could decide what mine are. I know you all think you know all the time anyway. So he started going on, and I loved talking to him because he was explaining himself, going on and on and on, but they always started with the soundbite. And finally I looked at him and I said, "Son, do you believe that the President of the United States was born here? Do you think he's an American citizen?" And he went, "Huh." I said, "Think for a second. Don't answer me. You're talking to your rabbi. Think for a second." He says, "No, I can't stand him, but I know he's an American." Folks, if you can't start with the President of the United States being American and legitimate, if you can't start with George W. Bush not being legitimate, the Democrats called him illegitimate, the Republicans call Obama illegitimate, it's a bunch of you-know-what, which I can't even say here. But that's what it is. That's what we're going to start with already, that they're not even legitimate presidents? We fume about argue about how our government gets everything done. But when we can no longer learn from each other, let me just tell you that we are tacitly affirming everything we've come to despise about Congress. When we act that way, we are tacitly affirming everything that we can't stand about the do-nothing Congress. Everyone says, I love this comment, and I'm over it already, just walk 10 miles in someone else's shoes. Love the other as yourself. Well, in my sabbatical, I was pushed by a think tank to do better than that. They made each of us pick one issue that we were vehemently against, because this is what Hillel said to do in times of old, and choose to teach it from their emotional standpoint. And they gave me guns. Now listen, I have come because of many discussions to actually be a strong advocate of the Second Amendment. But otherwise, guns and I don't get along well. It's enough personal stories, I'm not going to tell you why. Actually, you will get one in a moment. I know, that's me. What do you want? I make you crazy, but I tell you the truth. So I had guns, and I was looking up at NRA, I'm making myself a good little list of things, and a friend of mine says to me, "You're not taking this seriously. The text says you're supposed to emotionally stand in the other's place to actually teach a lesson from their point of view." And then it hit me. It hit me that when I was 16 years old, my father, in his late 50s, and my younger sister, who was 12, were jumped by two guys coming back from the movies in Brooklyn on Eastern Parkway. They jumped us and they took a blade out this big and they put it up to my sister's neck. My father, the little English professor, rolling around trying to protect his children, didn't realize there was a knife, and the guy said, "Cut her, cut her." And my sister Rivka said, "Please don't kill me." And folks, I'll tell you something right now. If I had had a gun, in 2 seconds flat, I would have taken out and shot both those guys. It's everything against that I am. It's against everything that I am. And I know it would have changed my life forever, but to this day, I still know if it happened to me right now, in that moment, my sister, There never would have been a shot. I emotionally got to the other side, and I understood why some people in this world feel, it may not be my truth, but some people in this world feel differently than I do, and it doesn't mean that I'm right just because they feel that way. Folks, there's this great midrash that says that God in the beginning of the world took truth, threw it down onto the ground, and it broke into a million pieces, millions and millions of pieces. And it says that when we get into an argument with someone, and we get really passionate about the argument, and we get really hot under the colander and red, the rabbis of old say, stop right there. Because in that moment, when you're really getting hot, it's not just that you disagree, but probably the other person is offering something that's also probably true. You get that? I said this a couple weeks ago during a bar mitzvah. You should have seen all these husbands and wives look at each other. Okay, well, we get into, that's a safe place to do that. So remember that the next time you're in one of those places and you're really getting angry, and you really got to prove that you're the one who's right, the tradition says it's probably not just because you disagree, but the darn person's probably saying something that's actually very true. That's what civility is, folks. It's not being polite. It's not being well-mannered. That we expect. It's actually according the person that you are in interaction with a degree, a modicum of respect, and also the room to actually think that what they say is true. Because the bottom line is that it's not good times that test our mettle. That's easy. The question is during crisis, who are we going to be and how are we going to be measured and how are our children going to look at us? I am going to stand foursquare with Israel. I am going to implore you to do the same. I am going to stand up for my people like there's no tomorrow. But along the way, I have an obligation, and so do you, that we're not going to lose our civility, our ability to hear truth from others, our ability to understand that the Palestinian people is not Hamas. They are disgusting. And they're ruining their people. But there are pieces of truth all over the place. And all that we have to hold in one container. We think we don't, but we do. It's all one container. Solidarity, support, and civility are all in one container. So, second part of service in sermon. Now it's time for the alarm clock to remind us about civility, to remind us to listen to the truth of everyone you talk to, your husbands, your wives, your neighbors, and maybe even our enemies. We need to listen. Listen to the sound of civility. Listen to the sound of truth. Tekiah, Shevarim, Shevarim Teruah, Tekiah. And now, I come to a conclusion in a way that I promised we would try to last year. We've thought about Israel. We have thought about how we act in this world. And I want to make sure you also think about yourselves. Can't leave this room without thinking about you. As I was leaving an extraordinary weekend, and my first full weekend back, bar mitzvah, naming, and very moving bar mitzvah for many different reasons, very moving naming for many different reasons. So you know what I do when I've had it. I go eat. I think Marty Goldberg's around here someplace. I usually go there. This time I didn't. I went to another proprietor, sorry Marty, down the street someplace. And I walked in, and I didn't want to be bothered with anyone. I had it. I was emotionally drained. And the owner comes up to me, wears a cross, and he says, "Do you know how to get money to Israel?" And I said, "Yeah, of course I do." He said, "Hang on a second." He went upstairs and came back downstairs, handed me an envelope, and I said, "Why are you doing this?" He said, "I'm doing this because I need to be able to sleep at night. I don't know how your people do it." I went into my car, I opened up the envelope, and it was packed with $100 bills, which of course went off to a charity. So I guess the point is that we have friends. We have to open up to who they are. We have to open our hearts and know that there's a lot to stand up for and also a lot good about the world. So folks, take a couple of moments and think about what's good in your world, what you're thankful for, what you need in this new year. No sitting and standing and reading. Just think for yourselves. And ask God for what it is that you really want and deserve and you want to be in this world, because you all deserve it. You do. You're special souls, all made in the unique image of God. So take a couple of moments to think about what you want in this year 5775. As you hear the sounds of the shofar, may you be woken up to everything that you need this year, everything our world needs.